why don't you do this for me, Jeff? Can you explain some of the factors that you would use to determine a product's cost versus benefit? How do you work that through?
Well, the cost is obviously set by the pharmaceutical company, and as Mike said, God knows sometimes how they do that. Although my gut, by the way, is it's whatever the market will bear. We do live in a capitalist economy. Benefit comes in different forms. The FDA explores this extensively because they're always thinking risk-benefit, right? That's the charge of the FDA in the Code of Federal Regulations. They have to determine the cost, the risk-benefit ratio of a drug and decide to approve it on that basis. And we think about this as oncologists all the time. Can I take an 85-year-old and give him ipilimumab if he's got Crohn's disease? Well, that's probably not going to happen. So I have to always make the assessment, as all of us do as physicians, of will a patient be able to tolerate a drug? Does the drug have more than marginal benefit? And what's the likelihood it's going to prolong survival with a decent quality of life? I'm not going to treat someone who's 75 with high-dose IL-2. It's not going to happen.
Well, how much of an improvement does it take then? I mean, can you count the angels on the head of a pin? How much improvement does it take before someone says, oh, this is good, this is meaningful?
Well, I think most folks in the business would say, as a rule of thumb, if you have a prolongation of survival with a hazard ratio of 0.75, meaning you have a 1/3 increment in survival over the control group, that's probably meaningful. If that increment is weeks, forget it. If that increment is a month, forget it. If that increment is months added to a baseline of a year, yeah, if someone said, we'd like you to do this, you'd live a year with the control, 15 months, which is a 25 or a 30% increase. If we treated you with this drug, I'd say, okay, that's reasonable.
All right, but here's a politically charged question which comes out of that. You're going to tell me, just for the sake of argument, I've got this therapy with a reasonable improvement in length and quality of life. It's going to cost you X dollars. Does X dollars at that point feed in at all to this?
People study this. It's marginal benefit, and there's a guy who's at Hopkins, Tom Smith, I think is his name, there are many others who study this in our field. And Americans are willing to pay a certain amount of money in general per year of quality-adjusted life gained, and that turns out to be $50,000 to $150,000. If I told you as the consumer that, well, we're going to give you this therapy, it's going to prolong your life by 6 months, but it's going to cost $500,000, and there were a couple of 100,000 of you in a survey, you'd probably give it thumbs down. So Americans have opinions about these things.
Okay, a couple of hundred of you in the survey. What about one? In other words, there are people who might pay $100,000 for one more day of life.
You're right, absolutely. But am I obligated to honor that as a physician? That's not clear to me.
Is the government obligated to honor that? Is Aetna obligated to honor, let's set a number for quality adjusted life years, $50,000, $100,000. Where does Aetna draw the line?
So Aetna doesn't draw the line, and neither does the government, because there has not been political appetite in this country for doing that. Of course, everybody knows that in the UK there's an organization called NICE that does that kind of work and sets a threshold for what constitutes reasonable. We do not do that in this country. Are we ever going to do that? I don't really know. But what's been very interesting about the NICE experience is that it has led to alternative approaches to paying for expensive therapy. For example, administering the therapy to a group of patients, not paying for it until you know whether it works or not. If it works, not only do you pay for it going forward, you pay for the months that you've given therapy. Therapy that's ineffective, they don't pay for.
So now, who pays for that?
So the government does, because in the UK it's a single payer system, right? So could I envision such a thing? Well, maybe, but there's other ways that people have talked about it, right? So we've got value-based insurance, we've got reference pricing. Okay, you come in, you got cancer. We say, not we, Aetna, but somebody, let's say the federal government says, all right, we pay $12,000 for this. Anything that you want that costs more than $12,000, it's on your nickel. Value-based reinsurance, if it's curative therapy, you pay nothing. If it's therapy that has little benefit, you pay most of it. People have a hard time with those constructs. There's a lot of emotion tied up into it. Aetna's not doing that, right? But there's a lot of discussion in the think tanks about making the consumer part of the a much more part of the economic decision-making
But
process.
let's turn it upside down, because there's a cost to immunotherapy. There's a very high upfront cost, if you will. But there's a cost to not covering cancer immunotherapies. If immunotherapies really work, and they're great, and it's a one-time cost, and then in the out years, there's no additional cost. Now you're incurring, because you're not using them, additional costs going forward. The amortization is occurring in real time.
The answer is that is speculative, and actually that work hasn't really been done. So we don't really know the answer to that. What we know is that some patients have durable responses. But you know, just do the math, right? So how many patients have durable responses? 10%? Something like that? So you got 90% who got treated at a very expensive drug and are going on to more expensive therapy. So you got to do the math. It's not simply, oh, you know, well, it's clearly worth it because that 10% of people aren't accruing cost. That's a hypothesis. That's a hypothesis.
So you're shifting risk in one sense, I guess, or at least discussing.
I'm not shifting risk anywhere. I'm just telling you options.
But you're discussing at least some options that shift the risk. Let's get this syntactically correct. From payer to provider, and effectively at the end of the day to the consumer. What does the landscape look like as this happens?
Remember, you're the payer. I'm not the payer. We're not spending Aetna's dollars. We're not spending the government's dollars. We're spending every taxpayer's dollars. It's very important to remember that, because ultimately it's a societal decision. You're asking a societal,
Well, I didn't mean
moral
you
question.
as Aetna, but and that's also somewhat, if you'll permit me, a little bit disingenuous. It is Aetna's money in the sense that Aetna decides where it goes, right?
In the same way that the federal government decides
Yes,
how
where
to
your
spend the tax dollar.
billion
But
here,
it is,
a
of course,
billion
your
there.
tax dollar, and if you're a
Yes.
Tea Party person, then you have a very, very clear view about how that money should be spent.
But to take it back, at the end of the day, the decision's got to be made somewhere, whether it's going to be made by the payer, or it's going to be made by the provider, or it's going to be made in a real sense by the recipient of the therapy, by the patient. Where's this going? Is this going to happen? Are we going to be asking patients, would you like a $300,000, $500,000, $20 therapy? Here's your options. You want to live 1 month, 5 months, 6 months? Are patients in a position to make that decision?
Hard to believe that everyone's going to be in a position to make that decision. And this is a societal decision. As a collective, I think our country and most other countries will need to make decisions as to where you put the resources. I think it's a lot bigger than any individual, and I think those decisions are going to be made for us. I don't think as an oncologist in 10 years I'll get to choose to treat someone with a drug that costs $300,000 that will prolong life on average by 2 or 3 months. I'll be in a position where I can spend a fair bit of money, but I'll have to have a high degree of assurance that I'm going to benefit the patient at modest cost, not in money, but in toxicity.
You know, I'm just
But
out
Peter,
of the blue. Yeah, I'm sorry.
I mean, this is going to have to fall back onto the provider at the end of the day, because you know the variability here is the tumor. There's incredible heterogeneity. There's no way our patients are going to have the wherewithal to make a value decision about their cancer and their life and their cost and everything without the information that we have. And so I think we're going to have to be, as providers, part of that decision process. But let me just say that, I mean, I think that, you know, the problem that I see happening is that there are, you know, already, you know, situations where this is coming to fruition, these kinds of either capitations or other things, and we, as a society, we really haven't addressed this. So it's very, very difficult. As Jeff said, you know, he can't make that. That's a societal decision, you know. But it is, you know, already beginning to be, the envelope's being pushed.
But there's
and
no,
that's the challenge.
There is no reason that an oncologist should be uncomfortable talking about the cost of care with their patient. Let's face it, in the current system, as imperfect as it is, medical bankruptcies are skyrocketing. It's out of control.
Yeah, that's true.
So you know what? We're not doing our job right if we're not telling patients what they should expect in terms of cost of care.
So let me make it even more difficult.